Hello guys, it's Thursday. Oh, there it is, but it's the afternoon now. So let's go ahead and let's continue on with our story, Fuzzy Mud. When we left off at the end of chapter 3, Tamaya was going under the fence into the forest. What? So we're going to go ahead and jump right into chapter 4, which is titled Marshall Walsh. Let's go ahead and let's begin. Marshall Walsh wasn't as brave as Tamaya thought. He used to have lots of friends. He used to like school. He had taken band in 6th grade, and his music teacher, Mr. Rowan, had written on his report card that what he lacked in talent, he made up with enthusiasm. Marshall plays the tuba with gusto. He wasn't enthusiastic about anything anymore. Each day brought him nothing but more misery and humiliation. And it all started with a new kid in his class, Chad Hilligus. Students attended Woodridge Academy for one of two reasons. Either they were really smart, or else their parents were really rich. Tamaya was one of the smart ones. Marshall was an in-betweener. His parents weren't rich, but they both had good jobs, and they considered education to be extremely important. They cut back in other areas, like family vacations and going out to restaurants. The reason Chad Hilligus came to Woodridge was entirely different. He'd been kicked out of 3 schools in the last 2 years. The social worker assigned to this case believes that if he was placed in a more positive environment and made to wear a school uniform, he would stop fighting and become a more conscientious and motivated student. If his parents hadn't agreed to pay for him to go to Woodridge Academy, he would have been put into a school at the Juvenile Detention Center. So, Chad had started with everyone else in September. The boys in Marshall's class were in awe of Chad. The girls seemed to be drawn to him too, even if he also scared them a little bit. And for the first few weeks of the year, Marshall had been right there with everyone else, hanging on every word Chad said, nodding along in agreement and laughing at his jokes. Some people were terrified of being expelled from school. Chad was bragging about it. My 4th grade teacher kept giving me a hard time, so I locked her in a closet. What did she do to you when she got out? Nothing. She's still in there. And Marshall had laughed right along with everyone else. Chad claimed he'd been kicked out of 5 schools, not just 3. He was always coming up with new stories about things he had supposedly done. The more he got into trouble, the more everyone seemed to admire him. Marshall remembered the moment that Chad had turned against him. Chad had been telling about that time he had ridden his motorcycle to school. Did anyone see you? Gavin asked. Yeah, they saw me, Chad replied. I rode it right up to the steps of the school and into the principal's office. No way, Marshall exclaimed. Chad stopped talking and slowly turned to Marshall. You calling me a liar? Everyone became very quiet. Marshall hadn't meant it in that way at all. He was just easily could have said, awesome. No. Y'all heard him, Chad said. He called me a liar. Anybody else think I'm lying? Marshall tried to explain, but Chad shredded his feeble words with a cold, hard stare. For the rest of the day, the stare seemed to follow Marshall wherever he went. And for what seemed like no logical reason to Marshall, slowly but surely, everyone else seemed to turn against him too. Whose side are you on? Chad would ask. You're either with me or you're with Buttface. At first, Marshall tried to pretend that nothing was wrong. He'd walk right up to a group of friends and try to join in whatever they were doing. But one glance from Chad would send him away, his eyes cast down in shame. Snide whispers followed him whenever he went, along with the not-so-accidental bumps in the hallways. He became afraid to speak up in class. His grades got worse. Often when taking a test, he could feel Chad's stare burning through the back of his neck, and his mind would go blank. In other schools where 7th grade students changed classrooms every period, Marshall and Chad might have had only 1 or 2 classes together. There were only 41 7th graders at Woodridge, however, and it was Marshall's bad luck that Chad was in every one of his classes except his last period, Latin. Marshall had a brother and sister, twins, who were 4 years old. Even when he had friends and lots to do, he'd always be happy to look after them when necessary, or even when it wasn't necessary. Danielle and Eric liked to pretend that they were lions in the circus. They'd crouch on top of the kitchen bar stools and growl, and Marshall would be the lion tamer. Since losing his other friends, Marshall no longer liked to play with the twins either. It made him feel like a loser. When his parents questioned him about his bad grades, he blamed it on them. How am I supposed to study when they're roaring at me all the time? It was the same with Tamaya. Everyone picked on him all day at school, so now he took it out on the only person who was nice to him. He'd hear himself say mean things to her and hate himself for it, but he couldn't seem to stop. As bad as it had been for Marshall lately, today it had gotten even worse. He answered a question in class right after Chad had given the wrong answer. Afterward, as he was heading up the stairs on his way to Latin, Chad grabbed him from behind, pulled him down 3 stairs, and shoved him against the railing. Listen, buttface, we need to settle this once and for all. Settle what? Marshall tried. After school, on the corner of Woodridge and Richmond Road, Chad told him. You better be there, you thumb-sucking coward. Marshall and Tamaya always walked right past that corner on their way home. They'd been going that same way for 3 years, but today he suddenly knew a shortcut. Chapter 5. Tuesday, November 2nd, 3:18 p.m. By the time Tamaya made it to the other side of the fence, Marshall had already disappeared through the trees. She picked up her backpack and hurried after him, slipping her arms through the straps as she ran. Ducking under a low branch, she spotted him climbing over a round mound of boulders. Wait up! She called. Again, he disappeared from view. Her knee banged against one of the boulders as she scrambled over the mound. He was waiting for her on the other side, hands on his hips, and an annoyed look on his face. What's the point in taking a shortcut if I have to keep stopping and waiting for you to come poking along? I'm not poking, Tamaya insisted. Well, hurry up then, said Marshall. He turned and started off again. She stuck close to him as they followed the path that zigzagged through the trees. It had rained the night before, and damp leaves stuck to Tamaya's sneakers. Leaves continued to fall around them, one here, one there, gently drifting downwards. They must have missed a zig or a zag somewhere, because after a while it became clear to Tamaya that they were no longer on any kind of path. She had to fight her way through tangled branches and then step over a thick patch of thorny bushes. You think we should turn back? She suggested. Marshall's answer was short and blunt. No. Tamaya pretended to be brave. Every little noise made her heart leap. She got down on her hands and knees and crawled under a very low branch. Is this the shortcut? She asked as she straightened back up. Marshall didn't answer. He just kept moving forward. Her sock was torn. Her skirt was splotched with dirt. She didn't know how she could explain that to her mother. One thing she couldn't do was lie. She would never lie to her mother. Her parents had divorced back when she was in first grade. They'd been living in an apartment in Philadelphia at the time. It was a different apartment from the one her dad lives in now. Even back then, everyone always talked about how smart she was, which had surprised her because it wasn't something she'd given much thought. She was who she was, and that was all. She'd been given an aptitude test, and then her mother had her moved to Heathcliff so she could attend Woodridge Academy. One thing she wasn't so smart about was her parents. She couldn't figure out why they'd separated and why they didn't just get back together. After the divorce, her mother seemed very sad for a long time. On Tamaya's last visit to her father, he said to her, "You know, I still love your mother very much. I always will." But when she repeated those words to her mother and suggested that maybe they all lived together again, her mother got all sad again. "That will never happen," she told Tamaya. Even now, as Tamaya was scared to death that she and Marshall might get lost in the woods forever, she couldn't help but think maybe if she did get lost, her mom and dad would come looking for her together. She was imagining what it would be like when they found her and how they'd all hug when a small animal darted right in front of her. She stopped. "What was that?" she asked Marshall. "What was what?" "You didn't see it?" She wondered if it had been a fox. "Some kind of animal practically ran over my foot." So, nothing, she muttered. She didn't know why he was being so mean. They came to the old dead tree lying on its side. Much of its bark had rotted away. Marshall climbed on top of it and looked around. He muttered. He looked back the way they had come. Are we lost? Tamaya said. No, Marshall insisted. I just need to get my bearings. You said you knew a shortcut. I do, he answered. I just have to find the exact place where it starts. Once I find the starting point, we'll be home. And snap. And he snapped his fingers as if that proved it. Tamaya waited. She heard something crackle behind her, but when she turned around, there was nothing there. Marshall hopped down from the tree trunk. This way, he declared, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Tamaya scooted around the tree and followed. She had no choice. They made their way down the side of the hill until they came to a ravine, then followed the ravine upward. Tamaya's backpack felt heavier with every step. She kept thinking she heard something or someone behind her, but when she looked back, there was never anyone there. Marshall continued to walk quickly. She constantly had to run to catch up, but soon would lag behind again. Each time it became harder to catch up. Out of breath, she watched him disappear around a curve in the hillside. She shifted the weight in her backpack, gathered what strength she had left, and started to run after him. Something grabbed her foot from behind. She felt her sweater being pulled up against her neck, choking her. She twisted free, then screamed as she fell to the ground. Rolling over, she looked up, but nobody was there. No deranged hermit, no blood-stained beard, just a tree limb with pointy branches. Marshall came hurrying back down to her. Are you okay? She felt more embarrassed than anything. I just fell, she said. She realized her sweater must have gotten caught on the branches. That was all. Marshall continued to look down at her. I'm really sorry, Tamaya, he said finally. He seemed really worried. I saw a rocky ledge up the hill, he told her. You wait here. I'm going to climb to it. I should be able to get a good view from up there. Don't leave me, she pleaded. I won't. I promise. He took off his backpack and put it down next to her. I'll be right back. She watched him head back up the hill and disappear around the curve. She took off her backpack and set it next to his. She was too worn out to follow. She took off her sweater to see how badly it was damaged. It was worse than she thought. There was a hole almost as big as her fist just above her right shoulder. She definitely didn't know how she'd explain that to Mother. Even though she'd been given a full scholarship to Woodridge, her mother still had to pay for the school uniform. The sweater cost $93. It wasn't fair. She would never admit it to her friends, but she loved the school uniform. Monica, Hope, and Summer thought it made them look like dorks. They could go on and on about what they would wear to the last Friday of each month when they got to wear real clothes. But Tamaya always felt proud to put on the sweater with the words virtue and valor written in gold and the year 1924. It made her feel important, like she was a part of history. As she was thinking about this, she found herself staring at a large puddle with some kind of fuzz-covered mud. Her mind barely registered it at first, but the more she gazed at the odd-looking mud, the more it drew her attention. The mud was dark and tar-like. Just above the surface, almost as if it were suspended in midair, there was a fuzzy, yellowish-brown scum. Something else struck her as strange about this fuzzy mud, although it took her a moment to realize what it was. There was no leaves on the top of the mud. Leaves had fallen everywhere else. They completely surrounded the mud pile, right up against its edges, but for some reason, no leaves had landed on top of it. She looked back up the hill. There was no sign of Marshall. Her gaze returned to the fuzzy mud. It was possible, she thought, that the leaves had sunk down into the mud, but the mud seemed too thick for a leaf to fall through it. She wondered if that fuzzy scum somehow swept the leaves off to the side. A noise crackled from below. She turned towards the sound and then heard it again. Something was moving through the trees. She rose to one knee, ready to run. Then caught a glimpse of someone wearing a blue sweater and khaki pants. It was the boys' school uniform. She stood and waved her arms. "Hey!" she shouted. The figure stopped. "Over here!" she called. As he came towards her, she recognized him as the boy who had sat next to her in the lunchroom. He was the one who had stood on the bench and said a wolf had bit a hole in his pant leg. She wasn't sure if she had caught his name, but it might have been Chad. She looked back up the hill and shouted, "Marshall! Marshall! We're saved!" Chapter 6. The Ergie. The following is another excerpt from one of the secret inquiries into Sunray Farms. Senator Wright. As I understand it, you invented bioline when you were still in college. Jonathan Fitzman. Well, not exactly. I got a C- on the paper I wrote about my idea for the Ergie. So then I dropped out of college and continued to work in my parents' garage. They weren't too thrilled about that, if you know what I mean. Senator Wright. Mr. Fitzman, would you please try to not swing your arms so much when you answer our questions? Jonathan Fitzman. Was I swinging my arms? Sorry, I have trouble sitting still too long. I think better when I'm moving. Senator Wright. So, what exactly is this Ergie of yours? Jonathan Fitzman. Well, that's what I call the little guy. It's short for ergonom. It's a single-celled, high-energy microorganism. Very intense. Totally awesome. I got a tattoo of one on my arm if you want to see what it looks like. It's an exact replica. Senator Foote. I can't see anything. Senator March. Me neither. Jonathan Fitzman. Well, like I said, it's an exact replica. It's the smallest tattoo in the world. You need an electron microscope to see it. Senator Wright. And there are more than 1 million of these Ergies in every gallon of bioline? Jonathan Fitzman. 1 million? Try a trillion or a quadrillion or I don't even know what comes after that. A gazillion? Senator Wright. Try to control your arms, Mr. Fitzman. Jonathan Fitzman. Sorry, I don't even have a chair at my desk in my office. I have to keep moving. Senator Foote. So you are no longer working out of your parents' garage? Jonathan Fitzman. No, I've got this incredible laboratory now. My biology professor might not have thought much about the Ergie, but some other folks did. Some very rich ones. Senator Foote. How much does it cost Sunray Farms to produce 1 gallon of bioline? Jonathan Fitzman. I'm not the business guy. I'm the what-do-you-call-it guy. The guy who thinks of it all up and figures out how to do it. But if I had to say, the first gallon cost us somewhere around $500 million. $500 million? And what about the second gallon? Senator Wright asked. Jonathan Fitzman. About 19 cents. And that's where we're going to stop for our second reading today, my friends. We just read chapters 4, 5, and 6. Check in tomorrow morning with me and we'll read our next chapters in Fuzzy Mud and find out what's happening in that forest. I can't wait to see you guys then. Have a lovely afternoon. Take a walk. Hope you have a lovely dinner and see you tomorrow morning for our next chapters. Bye, guys.